She didn't recognize him at first. That was the part that would stay with her longest, later, when she had time to sit with all of it. That she had stood in the same room as him, breathed the same dusty afternoon air, and felt nothing but the ordinary nervousness of a woman arriving somewhere new. No shiver of memory, no whisper from the past. Just the smell of hay and dry wood, and the particular silence of a house that had been quiet too long. His name was Thomas Hale, and the last time Margaret Avery had seen him, she was 17 years old, standing in the rain outside a church in a town called Sorrow Creek, watching everything she had ever loved get taken away. But that was 20 years ago, and she did not remember his face. Not yet. Margaret had answered the advertisement out of necessity, the way most women in her position did. Widow, 41, no children of her own. A small amount of savings that would not survive another winter in the city. The advertisement had been modest and plain. A rancher in Hale Valley, Texas was seeking a wife of good character. No courtship required. Travel provided. A home in exchange for a partnership. She had read it twice, folded it carefully, and told herself it was practical. People had built good lives on far less than practicality. The journey west had taken 6 days. By the time the wagon dropped her at the end of a long dirt road with a cedar post at the entrance that read, Hale Ranch, she was tired in that bone-deep way that goes beyond sleep. She had been tired like that for 3 years, since her husband passed and left her with a landlord who had no patience and a world that had very little use for women who were no longer attached to men. She was tired of being no longer attached. She wanted solid ground, something to tend, something to belong to. The man who came down the porch steps to meet her was tall and lean, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had spent years looking into wind. He was not unhandsome. He was not warm either. He shook her hand the way you'd shake the hand of someone you were entering a business arrangement with, which she supposed was exactly what this was. Thomas Hale, he said. Margaret Avery, she said. They looked at each other for a moment that felt slightly longer than it needed to be, and then he picked up her bag and carried it inside. And that was how it began. If stories like this one speak to something in your heart, please subscribe before we go any further. Every week there is a new story waiting for you here, and this one especially is going to go somewhere you won't expect. The house was large and well-built, but deeply lonely. She felt it the moment she crossed the threshold. Not haunted, just empty in a way that too much space and too much silence could make a place feel. There were rooms with no purpose being given to them. A dining table set for one so many times that the wood had a faint ring where the single plate always went. There were no photographs on the walls. That was the first thing she noticed, and she did not know why it made her sad. There was, however, a boy. He appeared from the hallway on her second morning, stopping in the kitchen doorway with wide brown eyes and a serious expression, watching her the way a cautious animal watches something unfamiliar. He was perhaps 9 or 10, slight, with dark curling hair that needed cutting, and a shirt with a button missing at the collar. "You must be the woman from the advertisement," he said. She almost smiled. "I am. Margaret. What's your name?" "Samuel," he said. "My father told me you were coming." She looked at him. "Are you glad I came?" He considered this with the gravity that certain children bring to honest questions. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I made you some coffee. It's on the stove." She did nearly smile then. Thomas Hale had not mentioned a son in the advertisement. She had wondered about that, and on the third evening, when Samuel was in bed and they were sitting on the porch in the quiet that had become their particular custom, she asked him directly. "You didn't mention Samuel." He was quiet for a moment. "No." "Why?" He looked out at the dark land. "Some women won't come if there's a child." "I would have come," she said. He turned and looked at her, and there was something in that look, something searching, like he was trying to see past the words to whether she meant them. She held his gaze and let him look. After a moment, he turned back to the land. "His mother died when he was 4, he said. "He doesn't remember her well." She said she was sorry. He nodded once and said nothing more. But that night, lying in the room they had given her off the main hallway, she thought about a boy who did not remember his mother and a man who had no photographs on his walls. And she thought that grief could do that to a person. Could make you put every image away because looking was too much. And then one day you realize you can no longer remember the details. and by then putting the photographs back feels like too large an admission of how far you have fallen. She understood that kind of grief. She had lived inside it herself. What she did not understand yet, what was waiting for her just beneath the surface of ordinary days, was that Thomas Hale's grief was not only about his wife. It was about something older, something that lived in a town called Sorrow Creek. She found the letter entirely by accident. It was 3 weeks into her time at the ranch, and she had been asked to clear out the storage room off the kitchen to make space for winter provisions. Boxes and old crates and bundled papers, the accumulated weight of a life that had not been sorted in years. She was not reading things, just organizing. Moving bundles from one stack to another. The envelope was old, its edges soft with age, tucked inside a larger envelope of ranch documents, as if it had been placed there quickly and then forgotten. It had no name on the front, just 2 words in handwriting that was not Thomas's. "Come back." She set it aside. It was not her letter. It was not her business. But the handwriting bothered her in a way she could not name. Something about the particular slant of the letters, the way the C curled at the bottom. She went to sleep that night and dreamed about rain, about standing outside a church in rain that wouldn't stop, and a woman's voice saying her name. "Margaret, Margaret, come inside, it's over," and the feeling of the world coming apart at its seams. She woke at 3 in the morning with her heart pounding, and she remembered. Not everything at once. It came in pieces, the way things that have been buried a long time do. First the rain, then the church, then a name. Hale. She had known that name before, long before an advertisement in a city newspaper. She had known it in the mouth of a girl who was her closest friend, spoken with the particular softness that young women use for the names of men they love. Her friend's name had been Eliza. Eliza, who had loved a young man named Thomas Hale. Eliza, who had died in the winter of their 17th year of a fever that moved fast and showed no mercy. Margaret lay in the dark and pressed her hand against her chest and felt the years collapsing in on each other like walls falling inward. She had been at that funeral. She had stood in the rain. She had watched a young man on the other side of the graveyard, pale and rigid, who had not cried, not once, who had simply stood there as if he had turned to stone and intended to stay that way forever. She had not spoken to him. She had not known him well. He was Eliza's young man, and Eliza was gone, and Margaret had moved away that same spring and built a different life, and put Sorrow Creek behind her like a town in a story that belonged to someone else. And now, she was in his house, sleeping under his roof, promised to be his wife. She did not sleep again that night. In the morning, she was quiet at breakfast. Samuel noticed, the way perceptive children notice everything, and he watched her over his oatmeal with those careful eyes. "Are you sick?" he asked. "No," she said. "Just thinking." "My father thinks a lot too," Samuel said. "He does it in the barn. He says the horses don't mind." She looked at the child and felt something complicated and tender move through her. "Samuel," she said gently, "has your father ever talked to you about a place called Sorrow Creek?" The boy's spoon stopped. "That's where he grew up," Samuel said slowly. "He doesn't like talking about it." "Do you know why?" Samuel set down his spoon. He looked at her with eyes that were older than 10 years had any right to be. "He says he left something there he couldn't carry and couldn't leave behind. I never understood what that meant." Margaret understood exactly what it meant. She found Thomas in the barn that afternoon, just as Samuel had predicted. He was working a saddle with a piece of soft cloth, moving in the slow, repetitive way of a man whose hands know what to do while his mind is elsewhere. She stood in the barn doorway for a moment. "Thomas," she said. He looked up. "Were you ever in a town called Sorrow Creek?" The cloth in his hands went still. The barn was very quiet. Outside, a wind moved through the pines and then passed on. "Yes," he said. "Did you know a girl named Eliza Avery?" Something moved across his face, something that had been living underneath for a very long time. Like a stone shifted in deep water, disturbing everything that had settled around it. "Eliza Avery," he said, and his voice was different on that name. Lower, like speaking it cost him something. "She was my cousin," Margaret said. "I was Margaret Avery. I was at her funeral. I stood across the churchyard from you in the rain." He looked at her. She looked at him. 20 years collapsed into that single moment of recognition, not joyful, Not dramatic, but enormous in the way that true things are enormous. Quiet and weighty and impossible to pretend away. He set down the cloth. "I didn't know you were related to her," he said. "I didn't recognize you," she said. "Not until last night." He was quiet for a long time. She waited because she had learned already that Thomas Hale needed space to find his words. "I loved her," he said finally. "Not defensively, just plainly, the way you state something that is simply and permanently true." "I know," Margaret said. "She loved you too. She used to say your name like it was something she was keeping safe." His jaw tightened. He looked away. "I couldn't go back after she died," he said. "I couldn't look at Sorrow Creek and see it without her in it. So I left, built this place, married someone else who was good and kind and deserved better than a man still half gone somewhere else." He paused. "When she passed too, I thought maybe I was just meant to carry loss, that it was the only thing I was built for." Margaret crossed the barn slowly and stood near the stall across from him. A bay horse turned to look at her with one soft eye. "Thomas," she said, "I don't think either of us ended up here by accident." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I answered that advertisement out of desperation, same as most women in my position would. But I keep thinking about Eliza, about how she used to talk about you, about how she said once that you were the kind of man who loved things quietly and deeply, and that was the rarest kind." She paused. "She would not have wanted you to spend the rest of your life carrying her like a punishment." He was very still. "She would have wanted you to have something real," Margaret said. "A home that felt like a home. A son who gets his collar button sewn back on." She almost smiled. "Someone who asks dangerous questions in barns." He looked at her for a long, searching moment. And then something shifted in his face. Something that had been closed for a very long time opened just slightly, like a window in a room that had forgotten what fresh air felt like. "I owe you an apology," he said. "For what?" "For not telling you about Samuel. For the advertisement being so bare. For bringing you into a life I hadn't properly sorted out yet." He looked down at his hands. "I thought if I could just get someone here, someone steady and good, that the house might start feeling less like something I was just waiting inside." "Is that what it's been?" she asked. "Waiting?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Then let's stop," she said. That evening, Thomas found the box. She didn't know he was looking for it. She was in the kitchen making supper with Samuel, who had appointed himself official taster and was taking the role very seriously, when Thomas came in from the back room with a wooden box under his arm and set it on the table. Inside were photographs, old ones, soft at the edges. A young woman with light eyes and a serious mouth and something warm underneath the seriousness. Eliza, Margaret realized with a slow ache. And others. His parents, his wife, Samuel as a baby. He laid them out on the table one by one. Samuel came and stood beside him and looked at the photographs with quiet attention. "Is that my mama?" he asked, pointing to one. "Yes," Thomas said. "She looks nice." "She was," Thomas said. "She was very good." Samuel looked at the one of Eliza. "Who is that one?" Thomas glanced at Margaret briefly. "Someone who was important to me a long time ago, before your mother. Her name was Eliza." Samuel studied the photograph. "She looks like she's about to laugh at something." Thomas looked down at it. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile but was the shape of one. "She always was," he said. "She found things funny that no one else thought to find funny." "I like that," Samuel said seriously. They ate supper together that night with the photographs still on the table. It felt strange and right at the same time, the way that honest things sometimes do. After Samuel went to bed, Margaret sat across from Thomas at the table, the lamplight low, the house settled into its nighttime quiet. "I know this isn't what either of us expected," she said. "No," he agreed. "I also know that knowing who I am, knowing the connection, might make this feel strange now. If you need time to think on things, I understand." He looked at her steadily. "I've been thinking for 20 years, Margaret. I'm tired of thinking." She looked at him. "Eliza would have liked you," he said. "She did like you. She talked about you. I just didn't remember until now, until you were standing in the barn doorway, that she used to say she had a cousin who wasn't afraid of anything. Margaret gave a short, quiet laugh. She was wrong about that. Maybe, he said, but you're here. The trouble came in late October, the way trouble often does, arriving just when a thing has started to feel safe. A man came to the ranch looking for Thomas. He had ridden 3 days from Sorrow Creek. His name was Porter Ames, and he carried legal papers folded in his coat that claimed a portion of Hale Ranch land had been improperly registered, that there was a dispute going back to Thomas's father, a debt unpaid, a title unclear. Margaret stood in the hallway and listened through the open door and felt the cold settle into the house. After Porter Ames rode out, Thomas sat at the table with the papers spread in front of him and his head in his hands. Samuel sat at the end of the table in silence, watching his father with that careful child gaze. Margaret sat down across from Thomas. "Tell me everything," she said. He looked up. "It's complicated." "Then take your time." And he did. He told her about his father's original purchase of the land, about a loan that had been disputed, about records in the county office at Sorrow Creek that may or may not have been properly filed, about how Porter Ames had been trying to get hold of Hale Ranch land for 15 years and had found what he believed was a legal opening. "Do you have your father's original documents?" she asked. "Somewhere. Maybe the storage room." She stood up. "Then we find them." They spent 2 evenings going through every box in that storage room, Margaret and Thomas side by side in the lamplight, Samuel handing them things from the lower crates with the focused helpfulness of a child who understands something important is happening. It was Samuel who found it. A bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with twine, tucked inside an old surveying case. Inside was every document Thomas's father had ever kept regarding the land. The original deed, the paid loan receipt, the county registration, stamped and dated and witnessed. Thomas held the papers and looked at them for a long time. "It's all here," he said. "I know," Margaret said. He looked at her. "You knew we'd find it." "I hoped," she said. "But more than that, I thought you needed someone to look with you. That's different from knowing." Samuel leaned against Margaret's arm the way he had begun doing in recent weeks, naturally, without announcement, the way children move toward warmth. She put her hand on his shoulder without thinking and felt him lean in further. Thomas watched his son leaning against this woman who had arrived like something sent rather than found, and something in his chest moved. That night, after the papers were set carefully in order and Samuel was asleep, Thomas stood on the porch and Margaret came to stand beside him, and they looked out at the land together. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right," she said. "Not as a practical arrangement," he said. "Not as a household matter or a sensible decision." He turned to look at her. "I want to ask you as a man who has been given something he did not expect and does not want to lose." She looked at him. "Would you stay?" he said. "Not because of the advertisement or the agreement, because you want to, because this is where you want to be." The night was clear, and the stars were the particular sharp stars of open Texas country, and somewhere in the distance a creek moved over smooth stones. "Yes," she said. "This is where I want to be." They were married in the small chapel at the edge of Hale Valley before the first snow came, with a handful of neighbors and a pastor who had known Thomas for years and looked openly relieved. Samuel stood beside his father in a new shirt with all its buttons, and when the ceremony ended and Margaret turned, Samuel walked straight to her and took her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. On the way home in the wagon, he leaned against her side and said into her coat sleeve, "I've been wanting a mother for a long time." She wrapped her arm around him and pulled him close. "I've been wanting this too," she said, "for longer than you know." Porter Ames received the original documents by county courier the following week. The dispute was closed. He did not come back. Thomas hung the photographs in the hallway that winter. All of them. His parents, his first wife, Eliza. He hung them in a line of dark wood frames and stood back and looked at them, and for the first time in 20 years did not feel the looking take something out of him. He felt, instead, like a man who had finally given everything its proper place. Eliza's photograph hung beside the window where the morning light came in clean and clear, and sometimes when Margaret walked past it, she would look at her cousin's face and think about the strange and tender ways that love moves through the years, passing from one set of hands to another, never truly lost, only waiting to be found again. Thomas Hale had married to forget his past. Instead, he had walked straight back into it, and found, waiting there, the one thing that could finally set him free. If this story reached something in your heart, please share it in the comments. Tell me what part stayed with you. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, because these stories travel to the most beautiful corners of the world, and I love knowing who is there listening. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. There are more stories here, quiet and warm, and full of the kind of love that heals slowly and lasts, and every single one is made with you in mind. Come back soon. There will always be something here waiting for you. Sonnet 4.6.